Have you ever looked back on a decision and thought, what was I even thinking? Maybe you bought that shiny new gadget because the ad made it look irresistible, only to have it gather dust a week later. Or maybe you trusted someone because they sounded confident, only to realize later that confidence isn't the same as competence. We've all been there. We tell ourselves we're rational beings, that we make decisions based on logic, facts, and careful thought. But if we're honest, our minds are often like mischievous magicians, quietly twisting reality behind the scenes while we applaud, unaware of the illusion. Hey everyone, I'm Bix, and welcome back to Bix Book Summary. Today we're exploring The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli, a fascinating book that reveals just how easily our brains can fool us, and how these hidden mental traps shape nearly every decision we make. This isn't about how smart you are, it's about how aware you are. Because once you start noticing these psychological biases, once you see how your mind plays its little games, you can never go back to seeing the world the same way again. In this video, we'll uncover why we often make bad choices even when we think we're being smart, how success stories can deceive us, and what it really means to think with clarity and calm in a noisy world. So if you've ever wondered why people fall for the same mistakes over and over, or how to rise above that and make sharper, wiser decisions, stick around till the end. And of course, if you want to dive deeper into Dobelli's full collection of mental insights, you'll find the link to grab your own copy of this brilliant book in the description below. Rolf Dobelli opens with a brutal truth. We humans are far more confident than we are correct. We walk through life believing we understand how things work, but in reality, we're just guessing, only with a little extra style. This is what he calls the illusion of understanding. It's the comforting lie our brain tells us to make the chaos of the world feel a little more organized than it really is. Think about it for a second. If someone asked you to explain how a toilet actually works or how your phone connects to Wi-Fi, you'd probably smile and say, yeah, of course I get it. But the moment you try to break it down, step by step, that confidence starts to crumble. You realize you only thought you knew. That gap between what we think we understand and what we actually understand is exactly what Dobelli is pointing at. It's not stupidity, it's human nature. And this illusion isn't limited to everyday things. It's everywhere. In politics, in business, in relationships, even in how we judge other people's success. We hear someone speak with authority, with just the right tone of confidence, and we automatically assume they must know what they're talking about. We do it to ourselves too. We create stories about why things happened the way they did, why that person succeeded, why a company failed, why we made the decisions we did. But more often than not, those stories are just convenient explanations our brains invent after the fact, neat little narratives that make randomness feel logical. The scariest part? Once the brain fills in those blanks, we forget they were blanks in the first place. We stop questioning. We stop wondering. That's when overconfidence sneaks in, not as a result of wisdom, but as ignorance cleverly disguised as certainty. We start believing our own stories, and that's when mistakes multiply. Dobelli's advice cuts right through that illusion. He reminds us to replace certainty with curiosity. Instead of saying, I know, start asking, how do I know? Or could I be wrong? Because clear thinking isn't about having all the right answers. It's about realizing how few you truly have, and being okay with that. The moment you start questioning your own confidence, your clarity begins to grow. And speaking of illusions, there's another one that traps almost everyone. The illusion that success stories tell the full truth. We love celebrating winners, but what about all the unseen failures that never make the headlines? That's where the next bias hides, one that quietly distorts how we see success, effort, and luck. Imagine this. You're scrolling through YouTube and a confident entrepreneur looks into the camera and says, I dropped out of college, started my own business, and now I'm a millionaire. You can do it too. Sounds inspiring, right? It lights that spark of motivation, makes you wonder if maybe you could follow the same path. But here's the question Rolf Dobelli wants us to ask. What about the thousands of others who also dropped out, worked just as hard, and failed miserably? We don't hear their stories because they never made it onto our screens. And that's exactly what creates one of the biggest distortions in our perception: survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is our tendency to focus only on the visible winners while completely overlooking the silent majority who didn't make it. We celebrate success stories as if they hold the secret recipe to greatness: the morning routines, the mindset hacks, the risk-taking. But the truth is, those examples are incomplete. They're built on a mountain of invisible failures that never got the spotlight. Success stories inspire, but they also deceive, because failure doesn't leave behind interviews, podcasts, or memoirs. Dobelli explains this through a striking example from World War II. Engineers studied fighter planes that returned from battle covered in bullet holes. The logical conclusion was to reinforce those areas that got hit the most. But statistician Abraham Wald saw what everyone else missed. He realized those planes had survived. The bullet holes showed where they could take damage and still make it back. The planes that didn't return, the ones riddled with bullets in fatal areas, were never part of the study. The lesson? By only looking at survivors, we get a dangerously distorted picture of reality. And that's exactly what happens in our everyday lives. We mimic what successful people did. Their habits, their diets, their morning routines, their risk-taking strategies, thinking that if we just copy the formula, we'll get the same results. But we forget that luck, timing, and countless unseen factors often play a bigger role than effort alone. The truth is, success isn't always about doing everything right. Sometimes it's about avoiding the wrong things, the pitfalls that quietly took others down. Dobelli's advice is both humbling and practical. Don't just study the visible winners, study the invisible failures too. Ask yourself, who didn't make it and why? When you start paying attention to the missing data, the silent graveyard of failed startups, rejected ideas, and untold stories, your thinking becomes sharper, more balanced, and far more realistic. Because wisdom isn't found in worshiping success, it's found in understanding the full picture. And that realism sets the stage perfectly for our next trap, one of the most seductive biases of all, the one that convinces us the world is constantly proving us right, even when it's not. Dobelli calls this one the mother of all cognitive errors: confirmation bias. It's that invisible filter in our minds that makes us see what we want to see and ignore what we don't. Once we form a belief, our brain quietly turns into a loyal servant. It starts collecting every little piece of evidence that proves us right and quietly sweeps away anything that might suggest we're wrong. It's not that we're lying to ourselves on purpose. It's just how the human brain is wired for comfort over truth. Think about it. You buy a new car, and suddenly you start spotting the same model everywhere. It feels like everyone suddenly copied your choice, like the universe is nodding in approval. But nothing actually changed. Those cars were always there. Your attention just shifted. The same thing happens with our beliefs. If you think someone is rude, you'll catch every sharp tone, every dismissive gesture, every little thing that confirms it. But you'll probably miss the times they smiled or tried to help. Our brain is a master at cherry-picking evidence to keep our story intact. The danger with confirmation bias is that it gives us the illusion of certainty. It makes us feel intelligent, even when we've stopped learning. It's why people get trapped in online echo chambers where every post agrees with what they already believe. It's why arguments spiral endlessly, with both sides convinced they're right. And it's why real change, mental, emotional, or social, feels so painfully difficult. Because once the brain picks a side, it doesn't seek truth anymore. It goes to war to protect its identity. Dobelli's message here is powerful. Clear thinking requires humility. The kind that allows you to ask uncomfortable questions like, what would prove me wrong? That single question, he says, is the difference between a thinker and a believer. When you start looking for disconfirming evidence, things that challenge your assumptions, your mind opens up again. You start seeing complexity where you once saw certainty. Dobelli even suggests practical ways to do this. Read opinions you disagree with, talk to people who see the world differently, and sometimes play devil's advocate with yourself. Not to destroy your beliefs, but to test them. Because truth doesn't need protection. Only ego does. And speaking of ego, it sneaks right into another trap. One that keeps us stuck in bad choices, simply because we've already poured too much into them. It's the sunk cost fallacy, and it's one of the hardest illusions to walk away from. You've probably heard of this one, even if you didn't know its name. Picture this. You're watching a movie that's painfully boring, but you refuse to turn it off because, well, you've already spent an hour on it. Or maybe you're stuck in a toxic relationship but keep telling yourself, I can't walk away now. I've already invested years. That inner voice whispering, don't waste what you've put in. That's the sunk cost fallacy at work. Rolf Dobelli calls it one of the most deceptive traps in all of human thinking. It plays on our emotions in such a sneaky way. The logic sounds convincing. Since we've already spent time, money, or effort, we might as well keep going. But that's a lie our brain tells to protect our pride. The truth is, the past is gone. Those costs, the hours, the energy, the emotions are already sunk. They can't be recovered no matter what we do next. The only rational question left is, does it still make sense to continue? If the answer is no, then the smartest move isn't holding on. It's letting go. Dobelli gives examples from every corner of life. Companies keep throwing millions into failed projects because they've already invested too much to stop. People stay in jobs they hate because they've spent years earning the degree that got them there. We all do it. Because our ego can't stand the idea of waste. To admit we were wrong or that something just isn't worth it anymore feels worse than the loss itself. So we double down, hoping somehow we'll make it right. But all we're really doing is sinking deeper. Clarity, Dobelli reminds us, begins with courage. The courage to say, yes, I wasted time, but I don't have to waste more. That single moment of honesty can be liberating, because every extra minute, every dollar, every ounce of energy we pour into the wrong thing out of pride, we're paying interest on our own denial. And that's a debt no one can afford. The smartest people, Dobelli says, aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who can recognize them early and walk away quickly. They know that cutting losses isn't weakness, it's wisdom. When you let go of sunk costs, your mind becomes lighter, your choices become clearer, and your energy finally starts flowing toward what truly matters. And speaking of energy, one of the biggest ways we waste it is by looking around instead of within. The next trap is as ancient as humanity itself, the urge to follow the crowd, to believe that if everyone's doing it, it must be right. That's the bias of social proof. Have you ever walked past two restaurants, one buzzing with people, the other completely empty, and without even tasting the food, assumed the crowded one must be better? That's social proof in action, one of the most powerful and persuasive forces shaping how we think and behave. We humans are tribal by nature. For thousands of years, survival depended on staying with the group. If everyone suddenly started running from a rustle in the bushes, you didn't stop to check. You ran too. That instinct probably saved your ancestors' lives. But in the modern world, that same instinct quietly hijacks our decisions. It doesn't protect us from lions anymore. It just pushes us to follow trends, buy things we don't need, and believe things that might not even be true. Dobelli explains that social proof works like this. When we see others doing something, we assume it must be right. We buy what others buy, like what others like, believe what others believe. Not because we've thought deeply about it, but because following feels safe. And that's the danger. The crowd isn't always wise. It's just loud. Popularity and truth are not the same thing. You can see this bias everywhere. From viral social media trends to stock market bubbles, from fashion crazes to political movements, most of them start because people see others doing something and simply join in. It feels comfortable, even reassuring. But comfort and clarity rarely live in the same place. True thinking, the kind Dobelli talks about, often means stepping back from the noise and asking yourself, would I still make this choice if no one else was doing it? He gives a powerful example from the 2008 financial crisis. Entire industries collapsed because people invested where everyone else was investing. No one wanted to miss out, and no one wanted to look foolish for questioning the crowd. The few who paused, who asked hard questions when everyone else was euphoric, were the ones who survived financially, while the rest followed confidence straight into disaster. Dobelli's advice here is simple but rare. Practice independent thought. Watch the crowd, but don't worship it. Observe trends, but don't automatically trust them. The clearest thinkers are often the quiet ones standing apart, calmly watching while everyone else runs in circles. Because wisdom doesn't come from belonging, it comes from seeing clearly, even when you stand alone. And that leads us to another illusion that distorts our judgment, one that hides in plain sight every day. It's called the halo effect, the bias that makes one good impression blind us to everything else. Picture this. Someone walks into a room, confident, well-dressed, speaking smoothly. Within seconds, you feel they must be competent, trustworthy, maybe even kind. You don't know them, but your brain has already made up its mind. That's the halo effect, one of the most deceptive tricks our minds play on us. Dobelli explains that the halo effect happens when one positive trait, like beauty, charm, or success, spills over and colors everything else about a person. If someone looks good or sounds confident, we automatically assume they're good at everything else too. It's like our mind hands them an invisible glowing halo that blinds us to their flaws. And this happens everywhere. We assume attractive people are smarter. We trust CEOs who speak with confidence more than those who quietly get the job done. We see someone's polished Instagram feed and instantly believe they must be genuinely happy. But what we're really seeing isn't truth. It's projection. The halo effect turns perception into illusion, and illusion into judgment. Dobelli also flips the lens to show its mirror image, the horn effect. When we dislike one thing about someone, we let that negativity spread across everything else. Maybe they made one mistake, disagreed with you once, or gave a bad first impression. Suddenly, your mind paints them as arrogant, unreliable, or incompetent. In both cases, we're not seeing people for who they are. We're seeing them through the fog of our emotional shortcuts. The halo effect is especially dangerous in leadership, hiring, politics, and yes, even in love. We fall for appearances instead of substance. We hire charisma over competence. We elect charm over character. We fall in love with a projection, not a person. And then we wonder why the reality feels different once the glow fades. Dobelli's advice cuts through the illusion. Separate the traits. Don't let one good or bad quality define the whole picture. The next time you're impressed or disappointed by someone, pause and ask, am I judging the person or just reacting to the glow around them? Because clear thinking means seeing people as they are, not as your emotions paint them. And speaking of distorted judgment, there's another bias that creeps in when we evaluate choices after the fact: the outcome bias. It's what makes us believe that good results always mean good decisions, even when luck was the real reason. Imagine this. Two people take the exact same risky decision. One succeeds, the other fails. Who do we praise? The one who won, of course. But as Rolf Dobelli reminds us, that's often a mistake. This is outcome bias, our tendency to judge the quality of a decision by its result, instead of by the reasoning that led to it. And we all fall for it. A doctor makes a reckless guess that happens to be right. We call them brilliant. Another makes a thoughtful, well-informed choice that goes wrong by pure chance. We call them careless. The outcome blinds us to the process. It tricks us into rewarding luck and punishing logic. Dobelli reminds us that luck plays a far bigger role in life than most of us want to admit. A risky bet that pays off doesn't necessarily mean it was a smart bet. It just means you got lucky. A relationship that somehow worked out doesn't mean every choice along the way was wise. When we confuse success with skill, we stop learning. We start believing we're better decision makers than we really are. And that's when arrogance quietly replaces awareness. This bias is everywhere, especially in business and investing. One CEO gets lucky with timing or trends and suddenly becomes a genius leader. Another faces a downturn beyond their control and is labeled a failure. But if you look closely, the difference often isn't in intelligence, it's in randomness. The world doesn't reward the best decisions. It rewards the outcomes that happen to work. As Dobelli says, don't confuse a good outcome with a good decision. So what's the antidote? Focus on the process, not the result. When you make a decision, ask yourself, did I think clearly? Did I use logic, reason, and evidence? Or was I guided by emotion, pressure, or fear? If your process was sound, then a bad result isn't failure. It's feedback. It's just another data point to refine your thinking for next time. Because in the long run, clear decisions compound, even when individual outcomes don't. And that brings us to another illusion that quietly shapes how we see everything, from prices and products to people and choices. It's called the contrast effect, and it fools us every single day without us even noticing. Dobelli calls the contrast effect one of the sneakiest tricks our brains play, because it operates quietly, almost invisibly, in every comparison we make. We rarely judge things on their own. We judge them in relation to something else. Imagine this. You walk into a store to buy a jacket. The first one you try costs $500. You gasp a little inside, but then you spot another one for $200, and instantly it feels like a bargain. But here's the catch. It's not cheap at all. The $500 price tag just created a mental anchor that made the $200 one seem affordable. That's the contrast effect in action. We don't see things as they truly are, we see them relative to what came before. And this doesn't just happen with money. It happens everywhere, in relationships, in careers, even in our sense of happiness. After spending time with someone extraordinary, a kind and ordinary person might seem dull. After one big win, an average day can suddenly feel disappointing. Our brains are constantly recalibrating what feels good, fair, or satisfying based on whatever came just before it. We're not seeing reality, we're seeing a comparison. Dobelli warns that marketers, negotiators, and manipulators exploit this bias all the time. They show us extremes first to make the middle option look perfect. A real estate agent might start with a horrible apartment so the next one feels amazing. A car dealer might present an overpriced model first so the next one looks like a great deal. None of it's accidental. It's all psychology. To think clearly, Dobelli says, we have to separate our decisions from the noise of comparison. Before reacting, pause and ask yourself, would this still seem fair, beautiful, or valuable if I hadn't seen the other option first? Because the moment you strip away contrast, the fog begins to lift. Reality stops shifting, and things start to appear as they actually are. And once you begin to notice how easily external cues distort your judgment, you start to see another powerful force at work: authority bias. The tendency to follow those who appear to know better, even when our own logic whispers otherwise. We've all done it. Taken someone's word as absolute truth just because they wore a lab coat, had a title, or spoke with unshakable confidence. That's authority bias, one of the most subtle and dangerous traps Rolf Dobelli warns us about. He puts it perfectly. When an expert speaks, our critical thinking tends to take a nap. We assume authority means accuracy. But history tells a very different story. Some of the most respected experts in their fields have been wrong, sometimes disastrously so. There was a time when doctors recommended smoking to relieve stress. Economists once swore the housing market could never crash. The problem wasn't their intelligence, it was our blind trust. Dobelli explains that this bias runs deep in our wiring. As children, obeying authority keeps us safe. It helps us learn and survive. But as adults, that same instinct can keep us from thinking for ourselves. We defer to leaders, bosses, teachers, or influencers simply because they sound certain. We mistake confidence for competence. Yet, as Dobelli reminds us, confidence isn't proof of knowledge. It's often just a mask for uncertainty. He brings up one of the most chilling studies in psychology, the Milgram experiment. In it, ordinary people were told by a man in a lab coat to administer what they believed were electric shocks to another person. Even as the victim screamed in pain, most participants obeyed. Why? Because an authority figure told them to. The conclusion was shocking. Our respect for authority can override both moral judgment and rational thought. Dobelli's advice is both simple and freeing. Separate the message from the messenger. Don't ask, who said it? Ask, is it true? Don't be impressed by titles, reputations, or confident tones. Look for logic, evidence, and consistency. The clearest thinkers aren't the ones who follow authority. They're the ones who question it, including their own. And speaking of questioning, there's another bias that quietly distorts how we see the world. One that tricks us into believing that whatever just happened must be the most important thing. It's called recency bias, and it warps the way we see patterns, risks, and progress. Imagine this. You're watching the stock market. It's been rising for weeks, and everyone's saying the same thing. It'll never stop. You start to believe it too. It feels safe, inevitable, until the day you invest and everything crashes. What happened? Your mind got tricked by recency bias, the illusion that what's happening now will keep happening forever. Dobelli explains that our brains give far too much importance to recent events. The latest news, the newest trend, the freshest emotion, they all loom larger in our minds than older ones, even when the long-term picture tells a very different story. It's why we think a bad week at work means our career is collapsing, or why one rough conversation convinces us a relationship is falling apart. The present moment blinds us, making us forget everything that came before it. This bias keeps us reactive instead of reflective. We panic at small dips in the market, make impulsive decisions during emotional storms, and let the mood of the moment outweigh the lessons of history. It's why humanity keeps repeating the same mistakes, generation after generation, because we forget how temporary the present truly is. Dobelli's antidote is simple, but deeply wise. Zoom out. Step back from the noise of the moment and look at the bigger timeline. Don't let today's chaos erase the perspective of years. A single day, month, or even year rarely defines the whole story. When you zoom out, patterns emerge. Clarity returns. The mind calms down. You begin to see that everything, success, failure, happiness, pain, is just a chapter, not the whole book. And that, ultimately, is the essence of the art of thinking clearly. It's not about knowing everything. It's about noticing when your mind is tricking you. It's about replacing certainty with curiosity, emotion with reason, and reaction with reflection. Because the moment you start seeing your own biases, the world itself begins to look sharper, calmer, and infinitely clearer. So here we are, at the end of the art of thinking clearly. And if there's one message Rolf Dobelli wants us to take away, it's this. Our biggest enemy isn't ignorance. It's illusion. We don't suffer because we know too little. We suffer because we think we know too much. Every bias we've explored, from confirmation and authority to contrast and recency, is a quiet reminder of how easily our minds can twist reality into something simpler, safer, and often wrong. Dobelli isn't trying to make us cynical. He's trying to make us awake. Because the moment you start noticing your own biases, you begin to step outside them. You pause before reacting. You question the crowd, the experts, even your own assumptions. You stop running on autopilot and start thinking with intention. And that, Dobelli says, is the heart of clear thinking. Not perfection, but awareness. For me, reading this book felt like cleaning the lens I've been looking through my whole life. It reminded me that intelligence isn't about always being right. It's about being honest with yourself when you're wrong. That humility, that curiosity, that willingness to see your blind spots. That's what separates a clear thinker from a clever one. So if this message resonated with you, don't just let it fade. Catch yourself the next time you find comfort in the crowd, defend a bad decision, or believe something just because it feels true. That moment of awareness, that small pause, is where clarity begins. Hey everyone, I'm Bix, and this has been Bix Book Summary. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the art of thinking clearly, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more book breakdowns that challenge your thinking and sharpen your perspective. And if you'd like to go even deeper into Dobelli's brilliant insights and uncover how many more invisible biases shape your daily choices, check out the link in the description to grab your own copy of the book. It's one of those rare reads that doesn't just change what you think, it changes how you think. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking clearly.